Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are heading out on another quick blast around in the recently updated Fouga CM.170 Magister. The aircraft received an update a couple of days ago. It's also now available outside of the Microsoft Flight Simulator marketplace. The changelog to the aircraft isn't drastic, but then again there wasn't an awful lot that needed fixing up on the Magister. It did release in a very nice condition. My primary gripes with the aircraft at the time of review all focused around the flight model. In particular, the aircraft's handling on approach and landing. We'll discuss that more once we're airborne, but really the aim of our flight today is to take the Magister up into the skies and see whether or not our flight model issues have been addressed. We're currently on the ground at a rather cold and windy Donegal airport, and we're just going to take the CM.170 on a quick lap around the field, pull a few manoeuvres and see how we go. As always, I do hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And just on a little bit of a side note before we get going, I've actually adjusted some of my NVIDIA settings for the video. Really just a little bit of a trial at this stage to try and get the sim looking a little bit more realistic. I've adjusted some of the coloration. I've also added in a vignette, and we'll be trying the auto depth of field setting for the flight today. Again, just a test at this stage, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and see what you make of the alterations. Let's head to the beautifully rendered cockpit of the AzurPoly Magister once again, and we'll get the aircraft started up. So here we are in the cockpit of the CM.170 once again. As we know from our full review, the systems of the aircraft are really rather good. It's the flight model that we're particularly interested in today, so we'll run through a fairly brisk startup. The master battery can come on. Just checking the left throttle is closed, left fuel valve is closed. Go to fixed on the navigation lights, and we can engage the left starter. So monitoring the engine RPM, we're looking for 1000 RPM before we introduce the fuel into the engine. And you can see we do have rotation there on the left. Once again, excellent sounds on the AzurPoly Magister. So there's 1000 RPM. Ignition and injection can go on. And the left fuel valve can go on. And once again, monitoring the engine as it spools up. We're now waiting for 4000 RPM, just coming through 2000 at the moment. There's 3000. And 4000, so injection and ignition can come off. And just waiting for the engine to stabilise at 7000 RPM. It's coming through 6000. And there's our 7000. So the engine is stable, the injection and ignition is off. Starter is off. Left oil pressure is checked. Oil temperature looks good, and the jet pipe temperature there as well is checked. So a good start there on the left engine. We'll start the right, we'll carry out our taxi checks, and then we'll make our way out towards the runway. Okay, so we do have two good starts, both engines idling around 7000 RPM. Oil pressures and temperatures looking good, same for the jet pipe temperatures. Running through the taxi checks, we'll close up the canopy. Heading indicator and attitude indicator power supplies can go on. Hydraulic pressure is checked, aileron servo is on, the warning lights out. Spoilers are retracted. And the park brake can come off. So it's coming up on the throttles. We'll make our way out towards the holding point. That's out at our 9 o'clock. Just doing a quick brake check. So we'll head out to the holding point. The before takeoff checklist in the CM170 is pretty short, so we'll just run through those checks. And we'll be airborne in very short order. Just coming up on the holding point for 0321. So back off the throttles, we'll let the aircraft slow down. A little bit of an upslope here, so that should help us without the brakes. And just using the brakes there to get the job done. So onto the brakes, park brake can go on, running through the before takeoff checks, flaps. Our set for takeoff, canopy is closed and locked. Oxygen is not required for the flight today. Pitch trim is set neutral. Pitot heat can go on, and just carry out a quick flight control check. And the flight controls fall free and in the correct sense. So once again, park brake can come off. We're taking runway 21. There's a pretty stiff headwind down runway 21. It's all clear off 03. And all clear on final. It's going to take us a little bit of time here to backtrack the runway, so we'll do that and I'll come back to you again once we're ready to depart. Okay, so we are all set. You can see we do have a pretty stiff breeze down runway 21. Park brake can come off. We'll hold the aircraft on the brakes. And just feeding in the throttles. Looking to rotate the aircraft at a speed of 90 knots. Previously in the Magister, the nose wouldn't come up at anywhere near those sorts of speeds, so it'll be interesting to see how the flight model behaves now. And engines look good off the brakes. There's full power. And there's our 90 knots, so coming back on the stick. And the nose wheel coming up as it apparently should, according to the manual. Overall the takeoff did feel much better. We'll tap the brakes, the gear can come up. And we'll get the flaps up as well. So during my previous video I actually had a real world Magister pilot and owner reach out in the comments and say that the aircraft actually handles pretty true to life, again even in its previous state, which is quite interesting to hear. There was definitely a couple of behaviours that I wouldn't have guessed there. And presumably there were a couple of inaccuracies since Azur-Poly have actually taken the time to update the aircraft's flight model. But my primary concerns with the aircraft at the time were the takeoff and even more so the landing characteristics of the aircraft, so they're really what we're looking to check today. As I say, it is going to be a pretty quick flight. We'll carry out a couple of manoeuvres as well just to see how the aircraft behaves there. We'll go into a stall, so coming off the power. Already up through 4,000 feet, so we've got plenty of altitude to recover. According to the real-world Magister pilot, the aircraft is pretty sedate in the stall. The nose just drops. It's actually very hard to get the aircraft to spin apparently, so the behaviour we saw there in our full review is pretty accurate. The buffeting and shaking you can hear there is FS realistic, but the nose dropping. And again, overall pretty sedate behaviour from the aircraft, just releasing the stick there to recover. So back up on the throttle. We'll build up a little bit of speed here. We'll head back towards the airfield. We'll do a low flyby and then we'll convert that into an Immelmann. You can see the runway just behind us now coming up on our nose. So we want at least 280 knots to go through the loop. We'll take the same speed for the Immelmann. It's pretty much coming back up to full power, we'll just come slightly shy of that. We'll make our way down runway 03. So just turning inbound now. Nicely lined up with the runway. We'll make our low pass. And coming back on the stick. Got over 300 knots here at the moment. The Magister does tend to bleed off quite a lot of speed when you pull a little bit of G, so be fairly sharp on the controls, get ourselves over the top of the loop. And just rolling out again onto runway heading. Try and go for a full loop. Again, we need 280 knots to do that. And just coming up on 2,000 feet, so we should have just enough altitude here for the loop. Aircraft still feels really nice to fly. As I said during the full review, it's a very enjoyable aircraft in terms of its handling overall. Back off the power. And all the way back on the controls. Again, very nice to fly overall. Going to an aileron roll. Again, rate of roll feels good. That wasn't quite full deflection. Disappointing sounds there again though. The default sounds always just break the immersion a little bit. Anyway, as I said, really we're interested in the takeoff and the landing characteristics, so I think that just about does us in terms of our flight profile. We'll come back for a landing. The aircraft to me felt very strange at approach speeds previously, and it was very hard to get back to an approach speed of 120 knots without being right on the edge of the stall, so really interested to see how the aircraft handles there. And similarly, it was a very nose-heavy aircraft in its previous state. Pretty much impossible to do any aero braking. We'll give that another go, but we don't have a ton of runway here at Donegal, so we might just have to come onto the brakes. We'll see how we go. Anyway, we'll come back on the throttles. In a fairly good position now to start thinking about turning onto base. We'll just bleed off a little bit more speed before we do that. We'll take the gear down. And we do have our 3 greens. We'll go to takeoff configuration on the flaps. And we'll turn inbound towards the field. And just come back to about 130 knots. Again, approach speed is going to be 120. That depth of field not quite working for us there in terms of spotting the runway. Anyway, the runway's out at our 11 o'clock. And it's going to be a fairly long final here now, but again, that's not too much of a bad thing. It'll give us plenty of time to get a feel for the handling characteristics. We're already back at 120 knots and the aircraft feels so much better than it did before, even with just the takeoff flaps at the moment. We'll go full flaps. And just coming up slightly on the power there to account for the drag. So landing checks, the gear is down, we have 3 greens, hydraulic pressure is checked, flaps are set full, landing checklist is complete. The aircraft holding the approach speed very nicely here as well. And as I said, the aircraft is just so much more flyable than it was previously at approach speed. Before it was right on the edge of the stall, really felt like about to fall out of the air. You needed a lot of nose up trim as well. So overall I think the changes that Azur-Poly have made, I think they're really beneficial to the aircraft. It makes the aircraft a lot more usable. And a lot more fun as well. It was always good fun to fly once airborne, as I said, but obviously takeoff and landing are a pretty fun part of the whole process as well. Anyway, nicely lined up here now on final. Again, a little bit of a long final here. Should be able to get the aircraft stopped fairly shortly with that pretty strong headwind. And as we discussed during the full review, the aircraft actually has a little tail wheel, so in theory we can bring the aircraft back onto its tail and use a little bit of aero braking to help us slow down. That was virtually impossible previously with the flight model. I've tried it once with the newer flight model and it's a little bit tricky. The aircraft really just wants to get straight back up into the air, but we'll try again. Anyway, back at around 110 knots now. Fairly lightly loaded, we've got about 75% of our fuel left in the main tank, no fuel in the tip tanks. Nicely lined up on the runway centre line, no pappy here, but looking good on profile. And as I said, the flight model is just night and day. It's so much easier to fly the aircraft now on the approach. Apparently my technique is all wrong according to the Magister pilot, but unfortunately there's no technique specified in the manual, so it's a little bit tricky to know what I'm doing wrong. Anyway, off the power, we'll hold the aircraft off. There's touchdown. Onto the brakes. Didn't really have enough runway there to want to try the aero braking. You definitely can get the aircraft back on its tail now, but as I said, it's quite tricky to balance that between it just going straight back up into the air. So we'll just continue down runway 21, vacate off to the left. And we'll go and get the little Magister parked up right back where we started. So onto the brakes. And vacating off to the left, we'll just clear the runway and then we'll carry out our after landing checks. So pitch trim needs to go back to neutral. And the pitch trim is set neutral. Spoilers are retracted, flaps can come up. And just making our way back towards the parking area. Right, so we have the Magister parked up, we'll get the aircraft shut down, pitot heat can come off, heading indicator and attitude indicator power supplies are off, aileron servo is off, we'll shut down the left engine first, so left fuel valve off, and a good run down there on the left, we'll do the same on the right. And 2 good rundowns, the engine driven generator can come off. Get the cockpit opened up. And we'll get the master battery switch off. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed another outing in the AzurPoly Fouga Magister. Once again, I think the aircraft is a very nice offering from Azur-Poly, and it's great to see that they've continued to support and develop the product. I think the flight model changes that they've enacted really make the world of difference. The aircraft flies very nicely now. That's not to say that it's a study level flight model, but the aircraft is great fun. And really now, Azur-Poly have made the Magister a very solid offering at its price point. Once again, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. As always, a huge thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. It's very much appreciated. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.